One of the things that I find to be most concerning for parents, whether it's the father or the mother, when experiencing divorce, is their children. Okay, that's one of the main concerns. And some of those concerns are the concern of their well being, to even the impact on their child's daily life in terms of stability. Okay, so when couples dissolve, one of the things that change are living arrangements, to even the adjustments in routines, to even access and availability to both parents. So now custody is being split. So time is being split between both parents now, to even navigating different rules in both homes, right? So, because parents, they have their own rules, they have their own way of doing things. And navigating that can be a little overwhelming for children, to even alienation with the non custodial parent. So, when I say non custodial parent, I'm referring to the parent who doesn't have primary custody of their child after divorce. Now, this doesn't mean that they're not an active parent. However, their day-to-day responsibilities are typically reduced compared to the primary parent, because the primary residence and the majority of the caregiving duties can typically fall under the primary parent's role, and that's the custodial parent. Okay. Another concern that parents can have is wondering whether or not if their children may feel responsible for the divorce, or even responsible for keeping their parents together. Another one can look like their child's quality of life. There may be significant changes initially, and those changes can raise concerns about how this could impact their child's overall well being, maybe from an educational perspective, to even future opportunities, to even where they may live, to even having access to extracurricular activities. Another concern can be new romantic relationships. People do move on relationally after a divorce, and that transition of a new romantic partner or blended family dynamics can also raise a concern on how this will impact your child. Another one can be special occasions, right? To holidays, to your children's birthday, to school events, to even family traditions. So, as you can see, there are multiple layers to different challenges that parents face when navigating divorce. And I'm going to tell you something: the decisions that you make for your kids before and after divorce will ultimately affect their well being. And that's important to understand, because what can easily get overlooked when navigating this process are your children. Now, I know that sounds real contradictory to what I said earlier about kids being the primary concern for parents. However, when parents are consumed with legal proceedings, custody disputes, financial concerns, and financial pressures, the emotional toll on what took place in the marriage, to the conflict that can occur between both parents, to rebuilding their personal lives outside of their marriage, to even adjusting to a new normal. And see, when all of that is going on, the emotional side of yourself takes over. And when the emotional side of yourself takes over, it will overpower all reasoning. And when that happens, the logical side of yourself becomes completely absent, because you're driven by emotions of anger, fear, hurt, and stress. And when you're driven by those emotions, that will drive your behavior, therefore also clouding your judgment. Your decision making also becomes more reactive rather than proactive. And you can find yourself easily getting caught up in the fight. And what happens is, when you're caught up in the fight, you start to create this unhealthy desire to win, no matter what it costs and no matter who it hurts. And so now this focus, it shifts. Okay. It starts to shift on what's truly best for your children, to now becoming a personal battle. Okay. And so what I wanted to do today, I wanted to give you all 7 key parenting mistakes to avoid before and after divorce. Okay. I want to give you 7 key parenting mistakes to avoid. Okay. The first parenting mistake to avoid is talking down about the other parent to them. That's the first one. The first one is to avoid talking down about the other parent to them. You know, I know this may sound like common sense. However, it is not always a common practice, because one of the things I stated earlier was that emotions take over. And when emotions take over, it will overpower all rational thinking. And when reasoning goes out of the window, guess what happens? The need for validation takes over. And when validation becomes the main need, seeking approval, needing to feel justified, and wanting to be right becomes the primary focus. Okay. And in those moments, your decisions become prioritized by the ego, rather than doing what's truly best for the situation or the people involved. And in this case, those people are your children. And so when you are speaking to your child negatively about the other parent, Understand that you are trying to influence how your child perceives them. And it's important to realize that doing this creates confusion, emotional distress, and divided loyalty for your child. So this does not protect them. This actually puts them in the middle of adult conflicts. And this can also damage the relationship with the other parent and even create tension between you and your child. Because it's important to know this. It's important to know that kids grow up. They do. And they will eventually recognize which parent was fueling the conflict. They will realize who contributed to the strain in their relationship with the other parent. And so this awareness to attempt to control their perspective of the other parent will backfire, leading to things such as resentment as well as mistrust with you. And so here's my point. My point is to allow your kids to form their own perspective. Give them the space to develop their own views, even if their views does not match with your personal view towards the other parent. Because here's the thing, you will see the other parent differently because your relationship with them was based on romance and partnership. Your child, however, has a parent-child relationship with them, which is fundamentally different and should be allowed to grow without interference or even a level of bias. And when you are able to honor that distinction, in the long run, your children will appreciate your respect for their emotional autonomy. Their bond, sense of safety, and trust will strengthen with you. And it also allows them to navigate relationships with confidence and develop healthier emotional boundaries, knowing that they were not forced to choose sides or carry the weight of adult conflicts. So it's important to know that regardless of how you see the person that you're no longer with, it is important to remember that although this person is no longer your partner, they are still the parent of your children, okay? And so that's the first thing that you want to avoid. The first thing you want to avoid is talking down about the other parent to them. Okay. The second thing that you want to avoid doing is that you want to avoid having your kids act as messengers. And so that's the second thing. The second thing is to avoid having your kids act as messengers. When it comes to the communication between both parents, children are not to be relied upon to deliver messages between both parties. Okay. That is not their job. Neither is that their responsibility. No matter how you feel about one another, no matter how old they are, or how trivial you may think the message is. Because when the kids become the messengers, okay, I'm gonna tell you what happens. They actually get caught in the middle of adult concerns and responsibilities. Okay. It also increases the risk of miscommunication, right? Because they may actually misunderstand the information that they have to pass along to the other parent. So that message may get altered based on their own interpretations as well as their feelings. And so when that happens, it leads to things such as confusion as well as conflict between parents over miscommunicated details because you all are entrusting your children to pass along these messages. It can also cause them to deal with the emotional reaction of the other parent when that message gets delivered. Okay. So let's just say the other parent who gets the message, once they get the message, they get annoyed, they get frustrated, and your child now may feel very uncomfortable. They may feel anxious. They may even feel a level of guilt of being the bearer of the bad news. Okay. Not to mention that this makes them feel responsible for the success of communication between their parents. And the level of pressure leads to unnecessary stress as well as anxiety for them. And here's what's important to know for both parents, okay? When you're no longer with each other anymore, this does change your relationship with each other. However, what it doesn't change is your responsibilities as parents. And in saying that it doesn't change your responsibilities as parents, this also means that this hands-off approach really isn't an option. You know, to think that I don't have to talk to them anymore because we're no longer together, even though we have children and they have access to the other parent, isn't realistic. And ignoring this fact also ignores the support your child needs. So understand that if you're not seeing it this way, know that the outcome ultimately impacts your children. Okay. So that's the second thing you want to avoid. The second thing is to avoid having your kids act as messengers. Okay. The third thing you want to avoid is that you want to avoid treating your kids as your therapist, your counselor, your coach, your confidant, or even your sounding board. That's the third one. The third one is you want to avoid treating your kids as your therapist, your counselor, your coach, your confidant, or even your sounding board. Here's the thing. Your children should not be the main source of emotional support for you. That's really the bottom line at this point. Your children should not be the main source of emotional support for you. They should not serve as your emotional dumping ground for your current pain, okay? It should not be expected from them to be your primary comfort, okay? And I say this all the time, for when you're going through something like this is a time to seek out adult support systems. And those support systems can look like a close and trusted friend or family member, professional help, such as a therapist or a coach who can help you navigate your feelings and challenges effectively, to even support groups where you can connect with others who are experiencing some of the same situations. I always tell people you're never the only one. And having that support group provides additional encouragement, understanding. It's a no judgment zone as well as a positive community. Because when you get the proper help, I'm going to tell you something, you also help your kids, okay? You help them by navigating some of these difficult conversations. Because here's the thing, your children are also going through the process of their parents no longer being together. And so what this means is that they are dealing with their own emotions during this transition. They also may wonder, like, if they are the blame for you all not being together anymore. And they will likely want to understand what happened, right? Why mom and dad are no longer together. And here's the thing, when they ask that kind of question, that's not the time to discuss to your children about legal logistics or your ex's actions or inactions, or even any intricate details about what transpired in the relationship. That's not what you need to do. And in order to respond to their needs, because here's the thing, in them wanting to know these questions and have concerns, you don't want to ignore the fact that they have questions, right? You actually do want to answer them. However, in order to respond to their needs with empathy, with clarity, and age-appropriate understanding, it is necessary to cultivate a level of mental and emotional intelligence so that you're able to navigate these conversations and feelings in a way that resonates with their level of understanding. And that's very important. So it's important to understand that your child shouldn't be burdened with the responsibility of comforting you, okay? Instead, it's your role as the parent to provide the comfort, all right? And so that's the third thing to avoid. The third thing you want to avoid is that you want to avoid treating your kids as your therapist, your counselor, your coach, your confidant, or sounding board, okay? That's not what they should be, all right? When it comes to dissolving a relationship, there are so many layers to navigate. The financial responsibility shift, creating an effective co-parenting dynamic with the other parent to mitigate or avoid conflict, adjusting to new living arrangements, navigating legal matters, your emotional healing and personal well-being, establishing a new normal for yourself and your family, to even planning for your next chapter and rediscovering your identity. And with each layer comes with the weight of making decisions. And here's the thing, you don't want to just make any decision. You want your decisions to be deliberate. And why does this matter? It matters because every decision you make shapes how you design your next chapter going forward. And one of the things that I realize is that when you're faced with countless decisions to make, it can create overwhelm, confusion, stagnation, to even making a decision that wasn't even given much thought, only to regret that decision later. And here's what I want you to do real quick. I want you to take a deep breath and ask yourself, what are two main areas in my life where I can use some guidance and an effective strategy so that I can thrive in those areas? And how will my life transform once I address those areas? And so over the next few months, I'm offering my one-on-one 90-minute strategy intensive for those who are ready to take the next step. And this is where you and I will work together on two major areas. And you will leave this intensive with a solid plan that will help you reach your goals. Okay? Now, slots are limited. And so if you know that this is perfect for you to start getting unstuck and start making some deliberate decisions for your next chapter, then head over to my website at tanyacarter.com/session. Okay? That's tanyacarter.com/session. And I will put the link down in the show notes. So the fourth thing to avoid is to avoid making your kids choose between parents. That's the fourth thing. The fourth thing is to avoid making your kids choose between parents. Your children should not be forced to pick a side. They shouldn't. Because here's the thing. When you do that, they are really put in an awkward position. And when they are put in an awkward position like that, that leads to issues such as stress and anxiety. It leads to things such as lifelong guilt as well as resentment. Because here's the thing, right now, your children are too young to understand the complexities of a divorce. Okay. And if they were placed in a position to pick a side and lost a relationship with one parent, that can actually cause them to feel guilty about something that they were just too young to comprehend at the time. It's also harmful to their mental and emotional well-being, not to mention that this is just an unhealthy parenting practice to do. And here's what I want both my parents to understand. I want you to understand that no matter how you feel about the other person you're with, it's crucial to remember that while they may no longer be your partner, they will always remain your child's parent. So guess what that means? That means that they love you and the other parent. And they're already having to experience and witness their parents no longer being together. And so the last thing that they need is added pressure to choose. And the thought of them choosing scares them because they might be afraid of losing the love of whichever parent they don't choose. You know, I was reading an article the other day that stated forcing children to pick sides in a divorce is like asking a parent to pick a favorite child. And I was like, that is so true, right? And in saying that quote, I want you to think about the uncomfortable position you would be in to have to choose between your own kids, okay? I want you to consider the guilt you would feel for making such a decision. I want you to think about the resentment it could create between your other children. I want you to reflect on the emotional toll it will take on the child who isn't chosen. And in thinking about that, I want you to understand that just as it would deeply affect you to have to choose between your children, it impacts them in the same way when they're forced to choose between parents, okay? And so I leave this point with a question. And that question is that the weight you want your children to carry? Do you really want them to carry the burden of feeling torn between both parents? And so that's the fourth one. The fourth one is to avoid making your kids choose between parents. Okay. And so the fifth thing you want to avoid your children being seen and not heard. That's the fifth one. The fifth one is you want to avoid them only being seen and not heard. Okay. So I grew up on the tail end of the Gen Xers and the beginning of millennials, right? And being raised by baby boomers and my grandparents being a part of the silent generation. And there was a saying growing up, and that saying was that a child should be seen and not heard, okay? And as a child, I'm not gonna lie, y'all, I didn't like it. I hated it because I always had something to say. I did. I ain't even gonna lie. I always had an opinion and I wanted to be heard. But you know what though? As much as I hated that, as a parent, I mirrored that same approach to my kids initially. Like I found myself doing exactly what I hated growing up. Because you know what? It's so easy to fall into familiar patterns, even if they don't necessarily work. So there were some things that I needed to unlearn and learn as a parent when approaching my children. And I'm saying that because our children are not only to be seen, but they also need to be heard. They do. They need to know that their feelings are valid and important. They need to know that this divorce isn't their fault. They need to know that they are loved by both parents and they don't have to choose. They need to know that there's an open door policy in your home for expressing their emotions and asking questions. They not only need verbal reassurance, but also affirming hugs and affection. They also need to know that their opinions matter and should be taken into consideration during family discussions. They need to know that it's okay to express their fears or uncertainties about the changes that's happening around them. They also need to know that both parents are committed to supporting them through this transition, no matter the circumstances. I'm going to also add that this may be a time where they need support beyond what you can actually give. And that's okay. What's not okay is to ignore that fact. You know, again, divorce is a life-altering event. I say that all the time. And so many decisions need to be made during this time. And so the emotional availability may be limited for you. And so I would consider them getting the help of a professional, right? Where they can process their emotions effectively, where they can have a safe space to express their feelings and work through their thoughts, to even having coping strategies to manage any anxiety or stress that they're experiencing. I often hear people say that children are resilient. You hear that all the time. Children are resilient. They bounce back quickly. And I'm on the fence with that statement a little bit. Actually, a lot, because it can also imply that children aren't impacted by their experiences, which is simply not the case. Now, can children display the ability to adapt well? Probably. However, it doesn't mean that they aren't hurt, stressed, or even scared. Their ability to display what most people would call resilient should not diminish the significance of addressing their emotional needs and providing them the support they require to process their feelings. So it's important to understand that resilience doesn't mean being invulnerable. And knowing that can help parents create an environment that supports their child's mental and emotional well-being, okay? And so that's the fifth thing to avoid. The fifth thing that you want to avoid is that you want to avoid them only being seen and not heard, okay? And so the sixth thing that you want to avoid is that you want to avoid expecting them to fill the role of the man or woman of the house. That's the sixth one. The sixth one is you want to avoid expecting them to fill the role of the man or woman of the house. When it comes to adult responsibilities, children shouldn't be handling what is considered adult and parental expectations. So things such as family finances, being a caregiver, making life decisions, parenting siblings, maintaining an entire household, to even chores that are beyond their developmental level should not be an expectation for children, okay? The expectation for children is to simply be kids, okay? Now, this isn't to say to not involve them in age-appropriate tasks and responsibilities. That's not what I'm saying. Because it's important for any child, whether you're in a two-parent home or not, to contribute in ways that will foster their growth and development. However, what you don't want them to do is be a part of a childhood where their freedom to play, explore, and be themselves is being taken away due to overwhelming responsibilities and pressures. Because when that becomes the exchange, that would be considered parentification. That's the therapeutic term for it. And parentification is when a child is forced to take on the role of an adult. And parentification can have significant effects on a child's emotional and psychological well-being, leading to issues such as anxiety, depression, and difficulty forming healthy relationships in the future. And so it's essential to strike a level of harmony that allows them to learn valuable skills as kids while still enjoying the joys of being a child, okay? And so that's the sixth thing that you want to avoid. You want to avoid expecting them to fill the role of the man or woman in the house. Before I get to the next point, people used to say that to my son a lot when he was young. They used to always say, well, you're the man of the house now. I will correct them right then and there. I just did. I was like, he's not the man of the house. He's a child. We're not doing that. And I made it clear to him. I said, you're not the man of the house. You are my son. You are my child. Your job is to simply be a kid. Now, I did do that. I heard it so much. And people will put that on them unintentionally. I don't know if people meant any harm by it. But for me, I didn't want my child to be responsible for something that he had nothing to do with. Because my son was 7 at the time. He's 21 now. But I used to hear that, and I used to have to correct people right then and there. And they'd be like, well, I didn't know. I didn't mean anything. You probably did it, but you're instilling in him that he's responsible for a home, and he's not. He's responsible for being a kid, okay? And so I just wanted to share that with you because these are things that I used to hear, and I'm like, no, we're not doing that, right? Your job is to be a kid, and I will teach you age-appropriate things, right? And so I just wanted to share that real quick because it just dawned on me as I was talking about it. And so the last and final thing that you need to avoid is that you need to avoid divorcing your kids. That's the last one. The last one is to avoid divorcing your kids. As parents, it's important to know this. While your romantic partnership may have ended, your commitment to your children continues, okay? And what this means is that your consistency to be active in their lives is crucial. Your word must align with actions, meaning that you need to follow through on what you say you will do. It means that your love should always and forever remain unconditional, regardless if you're no longer with the other person. Your support during and after this transition is needed for them. And despite any differences that you and the other parent has, you will always protect, provide, and give them the stability and safety that they need to thrive. And why is this important? Because I've seen it where you have a non-custodial parent, right? And remember, I talked about that earlier. That's the parent who doesn't have primary custody, right? So you have a non-custodial parent who wants to hurt the primary parent so badly that they will do things such as not see their kids. Or you have the primary parent who wants to hurt the non-custodial parent so badly. So they attempt to keep the kids away. I've seen it where empty promises are made to the children, thinking that it hurts the other parent, but it only hurts the kids. I've seen it where a parent doesn't come around at all. I've also seen it where they get into another relationship and create another life, and they disregard their responsibilities as parents from their previous relationship, which only leaves the child feeling neglected, abandoned, as well as unimportant. I've also seen it where parents place their own emotions above their child needs. And when your feelings toward the other parent become overwhelmingly intense, it can lead to decisions and behaviors that ultimately harm the children. And when this form of emotional maturity comes into a parenting dynamic, always know that your kids will always get the short end of the stick. So even though the nature of your relationship with the other parent has changed, your kids shouldn't be burdened by the fallout in regards to wondering whether or not if both of my parents will be present in my life. That should be one thing that they should feel very certain about, is that both parents will be in their life. Now, granted, they may have those thoughts during the initial dissolving of things, right? Because that's just a normal feeling to have. However, your consistency, your love, your word, your actions, and your support are very vital, because this will actually give them the reassurance that they're safe with you, and that they can also rely on both parents to be there for them unconditionally. Okay. And so those are my 7 key parenting mistakes to avoid before and after divorce. And before we close out, I want you to think of how old your children are now. And I also want you to think about how many years they have before they become adults. Okay. So let's just say 18. Let's give the number 18. So how many more years do they have before they become 18? And in thinking about that, I want you to ask yourself, what story do I want my children to be able to tell about their experience with their parents? What would you want them to say? Do you want them to say, you know what, although my parents were no longer together, they came together and they did what was best for me. They did what was best for my well-being. They were both there for me. I didn't see them argue. I mean, they had disagreements, but it was never to the degree where I felt unsafe. Or do you want them to say the opposite, where they had an unpleasant experience, where parents didn't get along, where one parent didn't keep their promises, one parent caused them to not see the other parent? Like, I want you to really give that some thought, because how you tend to show up as a parent will impact their story. Now, I understand that there are times where both parents will not agree. Both parents will not be on one accord. I get that. So I'm going to be honest with you. I am not ignorant to that. However, here's what I want you to also keep in mind. You can never control how another parent shows up. Never. However, what you can control is how you show up as a parent. So here's the thing. In giving these 7 points, yes, they are for both parents. However, what I don't want you to do is get caught up in, well, what if she don't do what she's supposed to do? Or what if he don't do what he's supposed to do? Here's the thing. That's something that we can't control. However, what I do want you to do is think about what you can do so that you can be the best parent for your child. Okay. So please make sure that you are following me on my social media handles. My Facebook is Tanya Carter. My Instagram is I am Tanya Carter. And my YouTube is Tanya Carter. And I will put everything down in the show notes. And also, please make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast so that you can receive notifications on when the next podcast episode will drop. And also leave a review. If you know that this podcast has been very helpful for you out of your transition from a marriage or even a relationship, then please head over to Apple Podcasts and or Spotify to leave me a review. And last but definitely not least, share this information. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, then please share this episode to them so that it may be a blessing for them. Okay. So thank you all again for tuning in with me this week. You all have a wonderful and an amazing week, and I will see you next time. Take care.